I have as my guest Paul Nipper, who comes to us from Occupy Longview, Washington State. And he has had some good success out there, some really great experience of how Occupy can work with labor and has, and that work is ongoing, and Paul will describe some of that. So let me first ask you, Paul, then can I ask you, how did you come to Occupy, and how did it then shift over to the labor efforts that you did?
I waited for many years of my life for something like this to happen. I always felt like I was born at the wrong period of time, that the social activism of the 60s, and I always looked at that as I wish that would take place in my lifetime. And when it started happening in New York, I was watching it closely, and then Occupy Portland had their initial march on October 6th of 2011, and by October 8th, 2011, my wife and children and I, we were at the Occupy Portland camp when it was just a straggling of 50 tents or so set up in the park, and we watched it grow to, I don't know the exact number, but well over 500 occupants there at one point in time, and just it grew, and from that point we started looking for other options closer to home. Portland's 50 miles away from Longview where we live, and we ended up spending a little bit of time with the Occupy Vancouver camp, or they didn't have a camp, but the group, as they did a few marches, and we participated in them. And through people we were meeting and online social media, and we found an Occupy meetup site, posted a meetup for November 16th of 2011, and that was the initial gathering of a few people in Longview, and from there the group grew, and we were immediately immersed in the D12 port shutdown actions that were organized at the beginning by Occupy Oakland and coordinated with multiple Occupies up and down the West Coast, and we took part in that. Less than a month old, and shutting down a national port. It was a pretty big undertaking, yeah, all at once.
Right. Right. So immediately on October 6th was the date that we started here in Washington D.C. as well, and of course Occupy Wall Street was a few weeks before that. Mm-hmm. So, but this all happened very quickly, as you said. It unfolded, and right on the heels of that came this labor organization. How did the longshoremen's what they were trying to do, how did that come to the notice of your group?
Well, living in Longview, every other house you drive by, it's a very small town, less than 40,000 people, and every other house you drive by in the working class neighborhoods, there's this yard is just a yard with a little picket fence, and this one has big ILWU, we support ILWU signs, and it's rather unbalanced discussion in the local newspapers and stuff, but it was a topic of discussion. It had been going on for at least a year at that point, and it was just by how aggressive they were, it was pretty impressive to see the length that they were willing to go to fight for what they felt was right and protect their jobs and the community, and they were standing up, and we felt like standing up with them.
Okay, so a fair amount of the percentage of the population is in this ILWU. They're your friends and neighbors.
Yeah, they are definitely friends, neighbors, members of the community, and
okay,
to see them struggling, and we're part of that same struggle. We're, when their jobs disappear, so do ours. It has a ripple effect.
And being a smaller community, meant more tight-knit, so everybody kind of knows everybody. That also helped, I guess, cohesiveness.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, take us through how that evolved, and when you heard about their efforts or what they were up against, how did you see your Occupy group maybe helping them initially? How did that sort of evolve?
Well, and I mean, the initial point, the basic facts of the matter is that the original lease agreements stated that the company EGT that was building the grain elevator there they would employ the unionized longshore workers on those docks, and they defied that lease agreement and hired another union of operator engineers out of Portland, basically pitting union against union, and the whole time their claim was that, oh, it's going to save us $1 million a year. When the rebuttal to that, nobody really talked about, that was $1 million a year coming out of the local Longview economy. If those guys weren't making that $1 million a year, that $1 million a year wasn't being spent in our town that's already economically depressed. And it just, that was a drawing factor to start with, but there's so many levels of it. The level of political corruption and influence peddling that the company EGT engaged in to secure funding for the port, and everything that port represents is part, the D12 actions. We emphasize that this is Wall Street on the waterfront. This is where these transnational companies come in, they buy political influence, they set up the infrastructure with our tax dollars, and then they export all of the resources and profits out of the company and out of the country, and they take it all with them. They reap all the benefits, and we suffer the consequences. It was just a very natural fit for any Occupy group.
So the outsized the influence of EGT, and for a small community especially, and how they bring money in and to influence things. Talk about that, and if you would, what is EGT?
EGT is basically the pretty face that Bungie International puts on to, it is their U.S. branch. They have many operations throughout the Midwest, up and down the Mississippi River, where they have non-union workers loading grain on ships. The same thing goes on in Washington at Longview at the port. They basically load, like I said, they load our resources, they take the grain, they leave the country, and they make all the profit with it in other countries. And when they come into Longview, their basic premise was, this is going to be great for your economy, we're going to be good corporate citizens, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to improve the town. They make all these promises, and they go out and they very tactically go to community organizations, your local clubs and organizations, and they donate money to this group and to that group, and most definitely donate money to the local police departments. And when you have the police department on your side in the middle of a labor dispute where union members are getting a little militant, I guess buying the police department was a very smart choice for them.
It seems to be a constant theme, like Occupy Wall Street and the influence of that Ray Kelly and then Bloomberg and that connection too. I mean, but here it is in your little community. You're seeing that very much so. Yeah. And I'm guessing too, Paul, that that it doesn't take a whole lot of money on EGT's part to spread that goodwill. And
no, it does not, because it is a very small community. And when you donate a small amount of money to this community organization and you present the check with your message and your public image, that check goes in their hand, and from their mouth to their members, the message of this is how good this company is spreads. And in combination with the reporting of the local newspapers and the other media attention that it gets, it's a very coordinated attack. And that's what it is. It's an attack to make the union look bad and make this great big transnational corporation look like the savior of the town.
So that's what you're up against as an Occupy member, and what the labor, what the ILWU people are up against. Now, so describe, if you would, how this unfolded. What was labor's issue with EGT specifically that got you folks involved?
Well, it was the direct violation. I mean, it's the established jurisdiction that the ILWU has with all of their lease agreements at ports nation and worldwide. I mean, it gives them, they're basically defined as the workers that will work those docks. It guarantees their jobs, it guarantees the standard of work and practices that they have set. And they worked for decades, 80 years, to establish what they've built. And here comes this company into town to destroy it with the signing of a check. I mean, there's just such a level of corruption from one end of it to the other, and it all starts. I'm not completely knowledgeable of the inner workings of the lease agreements and all that, but you know, they basically you know, they went around it. They did a legal tap dance, and just because they say it's legal doesn't make it right. You know, the human cost and the cost of our community to save that corporation some money, it's just, you know, it's unacceptable.
Well, so who made first contact then with regard to, was it the ILWU or was it Occupy going to them, or the unions coming to you folks?
Actually, when we first decided that we were going to, actually, I mean, I don't want to point the finger, but we as Longview were kind of, we were kind of coerced or forced into direct action immediately, because Oakland, in solidarity with the ILWU struggle, they put out a call to action. Multiple levels of what brought it to the point of the D12 port shutdown, but the initial call to action, we see the flyers and everything that are circulating, and it has our little town's name on it. So it was immediately, it was, wow, you know, we need to do something, because we're very focal to this. You know, we are a focal point.
So the spark was Oakland.
Yeah.
And it kind of went up the West Coast.
And it went up, and it was, their effort was in solidarity with the ILW 21's struggle in Longview. And, you know, the members of the locals down in Oakland and San Francisco, they organized the initial port shutdown that happened in Oakland, where you saw the people running all over the streets. Yes. And that was amazing. But, you know, it was a combination, basically, of standing in solidarity with the members of Local 21 and the struggle that they faced with EGT, and it was also a direct response of the coordinated eviction nights that took place. 18 cities consecutively, after having conference calls with the FBI and everything, 18 mayors of 18 different cities decide they're going to evict all the occupies all at one time. That's not a coincidence. So our response basically was, you know, you guys can organize an attack, so can we. And it kind of mushroomed from there, but our initial contact with ILWU members, when we created the flyers after discussing things with other occupies and getting involved with Oakland and Portland initially through the Inter-Occupy conference call system. After several discussions and conference calls, we started printing flyers, and as part of community outreach, my wife and I, we were driving around town, going to every house that we saw that had an ILWU support sign in their yard, and one of the people that we walked up to just happened to be an ILWU member, and from there everything really took off. I mean, we got a few of them to come to our general assemblies. They provided us inside information as to what was going on and helped us arrange the next step in the process.
So the inter-Occupy communication worked pretty well then?
Yes, that's an amazing tool. And I found it doesn't matter what the issue or action that's being planned, the way that is structured, and it's it starts off with a general conference call, and everybody's on the call, and they have an opportunity to set an agenda, and from there they form breakout groups, and who knows how long those calls go on or how many consecutive calls week after week are made. But initially, you know, it was a response to, here, it's an Inter-Occupy conference call and it's your invitation, and from there was a breakout group formed for the D12 port shutdown actions, and everything just flowed from there, and it's just one scheduled call after the next.
Okay. So once this sort of took off, I mean, the initial contact was made with between Labor and Occupy there, the ILWU. You know, I assume everything went swimmingly, and just, you know, everybody within Occupy got along very well with Labor, and we were all a big happy family.
And you know what they say about the word assume.
Didn't happen that way.
No, it did not. And it's still not happening that way. I mean, It's a very, labor is definitely not unified. I mean, there is tension from one local to the next. I mean, they are part of the same union, but they don't agree on what's going on, and the struggle that's going on with this local may not have a big effect on another local, and they're not that engaged or that involved or that willing to endorse. None of them at this point are willing to endorse outside participation. As a matter of fact, they're making it quite clear from the upper brass that they don't want outside participation. But that being said, the same thing that allows Occupy to cross the lines and be an ally to labor, we don't honor contracts, we don't honor agreements, we're not bound by laws.
Taft-Hartley, wildcat strikes, that means nothing to
And my feeling is, as a member of the community and as a member of the working class, I have just as much right to go down there and stand against any company as any union that works for that company. I am a member of the community. Occupy members are members of the community, whether or not they are members of the union or not. We have just as much right to be down there standing up against any company that we choose, no matter who's in the struggle or who tells us not to be there. And we're not attack dogs. We're not called on or called off. And when we chose to get involved, we got involved on all levels, not just the union dispute.
So that's the starting point then. I mean, you as a citizen, you as Occupy, however you want to classify yourself, you're not union. No. But you see the solidarity with somebody in the union, with the struggle against this corporation, this company. And that's how it sort of all starts, I guess. Everything comes from that starting point. Okay. Well, then, so if it take us through the timeline from then, Paul. Once there was an agreement to get involved in some way, how did that progress from there?
There was initially there was talk of doing a mass action in Longview, because Longview was used as a focal point of the December 12th port shutdowns, and there was talk of it, but until the absolute call to action was put out, and when we presented the idea to our General Assembly, and as taxed and just spent as we were from being head on into the initial action, the D12 thing, we immediately moved into, we're going to do this again. And we knew that the first grain ship, the actual pinpoint there was the first grain ship that was going to come into this new grain elevator and be loaded and leave the country was going to be loaded by non-ILWU workers.
Okay.
And at that point, the idea we presented to our General Assembly is we're not going to let them load this ship, because that would be an absolute, the corporation itself, EGT, could positively stand up and claim victory, because that would be, that ship leaves and it was loaded by someone other than ILWU workers, they win.
So that would have been how they get in to break up the union, and so that's what kind of made the union sort of militant to resist that, and they were looking for maybe outside help. Now, where within the ILWU was it with the how to say, the hierarchy, the union leadership? Was it grassroots people, or where did you have involvement?
Rank and file. There were meetings with officers, and I'm not even going to say who, but there were meetings, and our involvement was discussed. It was in those meetings. It was encouraged. That we were thanked. We were absolutely encouraged to do what we were going to do. But we were given an opportunity by the actual Cowlitz-Wahkiakum County Labor Council on January 1st, put out a resolution that basically stated, in support of the ILWU, the Labor Council itself is calling all working class people to come to Longview and stand in solidarity and support with the ILWU. By that Labor Council resolution coming to the table, we were then able to go completely public and completely upfront with what we're doing without putting the ILWU in a corner and saying that they are calling us and that they are endorsing what we're doing and, you know, making it look like we were an arm of theirs or something like that. And I mean, that even within the union, there were other locals that there were accusations that we were trying to co-opt their struggle to boost our movement. And
Yes.
I personally don't understand that level of thinking, and but that's where it went.
Yeah. And that word you use, Paul, the co-option, you know, and that works both ways. You've just described it from the point of view of the union being very afraid of an outside group co-opting their struggle. Well, and we hear very much of Occupy being somewhat wary the other way, that oh gee, big labor, you know, if we get involved, you know, here comes Trumka, or, you know, they're so tied in with Democratic politics,
Yes.
and we famously, and I think rightly, Occupy stands outside of that. And that's a position that has to be maintained. So yeah, to not get drawn in to electoral politics in that way, but so there's sort of the tension. You know, if Occupy does in fact go after labor to bring them in and to help them, or however this unfolds, how do we kind of separate that out between, you know, that's the natural, if we fall in their orbit, that's the black hole that we potentially fall into, is, you know, so we got to keep our distance. How does that tension work?
As that rift became very apparent from Occupy meeting to Occupy meeting up and down the West Coast, I mean, there's, like you said, there's members of Occupy that are outright against unions and their politics and all of the stuff that goes with that, and being part of the, there are some that view unions as part of the problem with the capitalist system that we're in right now. But the way we found to engage that was to more broadly engage the company, to focus on the company itself and what that company represents, what that company's doing to the, not only this union, but our community and the working class people that are, that focal point, it gave a little calmness to the people that were saying that we were co-opting a union thing. It gave a little reassurance to the people that thought Occupy was being co-opted by the union, and it gave us all kinds of openings. And the Occupy food people have lots of problems with EGT and the price fixing of grain markets worldwide, and market manipulation and the control of the food supply. And then you have the environmental people were able to get on board because of the environmental destruction and charges that they face worldwide. And you know, labor people, everybody was able to come together by focusing on the company and not the union. Yes, it was a union struggle, but the broad support and the actual engagement of people came from focusing on what this company is doing, not just how the union is affected by it.
And that's a key point in all of this that I see. That is such a strength. You mentioned, you know, we can blow past a lot of differences and that people may dwell upon and could, you know, destroy what we're trying to do. But when you focus on that one key item, that let's all look at what this company is doing or this corporation is doing, that suddenly becomes, you know, the nexus from which everything can flow, and energy. As I say, people can put aside all kinds of differences once you hold that up, right? That and that was the powerful center that held for you and your group.
Yep.
So pursuing that, yeah, I can certainly see how that would be the case. It's and we could say in the context of the larger Occupy movement as a burgeoning social movement, that also works there as well, because you know there's 1,000 different discussions that people can have and disagree on and be divided, but if you get down to that central core again, which is the outsized influence that corporations have on our life. It could be condensed down to a bumper sticker, which might be something like get corporations' money out of the public sphere. Or so I haven't phrased it as well, it could be, but something to that effect. That again draws everybody's attention. Yes, I guess that is the main thing. That's all, and everything flows from that. So So that worked for your group.
Yeah, and I mean, that, like you said, it works broadly for the entire Occupy movement. So many people, even as, you know, the media, everyone says that we have no clear, concise, pinpointed message. But the bottom line, the root of all problems, no matter what your issue is in Occupy, the absolute root of all of our problems is the money that's injected into our political system. And that money comes from corporations like EGT. We have absolute record of the hundreds of thousands of dollars that they dispersed from their corporation to a lobbying firm directly to the United States House of Representatives. And at the bottom of all those forms, accompanied by a check of $75,000, it says clearly, to secure funding for building a grain elevator in Longview, Washington. And from that point, everything else is a spiral, because they're buying the political influence to start with. When you're buying the law is on your side.
And that's rather, they were sort of blatant in describing what they were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're putting that out there. Yes,
absolutely.
this line item, this money is for this.
Yeah, and I encourage anyone to go to opensecrets.org if you want to know what any company is doing. You go to opensecrets.org and just check the files. That it's, you know, it's in full disclosure. They have the documents right there that will show you this check was for this and this check was for that. And in the case of EGT, it was a series of checks. I mean, before the Citizens United verdict, it was a small $8,000 check to support a forum for discussion of securing funding for the building of the grain elevator. After the Citizens United verdict, it was a $30,000 check, a $40,000 check, a $75,000 check, and at the bottom of every single disclosure form, it's blatantly says to secure funding to build grain elevator in Longview, Washington. And it's absolutely shocking to me that a company that can boast over $10 billion in profits in the last 5 years, why do they need my tax dollars to build their facility that they will reap the benefits of? That initially, I'm just a complete politics geek, and that's kind of outside of Occupy itself, but that initially is that is what drove me to get others involved with this. That's the start of it all, is that money. As that money flows, that's where everything spirals. And
following that flow of money and seeing how it's so one-sided. Now, you mentioned some dollar figures. And this is a multi-billion-dollar company in terms of profits and whatnot. But the money they were outlaying to your community and other communities, 8,000 here, 10,000 there. That's all we're talking about. Yeah. And that's all so their return on that must be enormous, because that's not that much money they're putting out.
It's the equivalent of throwing your pocket change into a donation jar at McDonald's or something. When you say, I mean, if you look at it on terms of their level of assets versus the amount of money that they're putting out there to have the laws written in their favor, which will reap more benefit down the line. It's an entirely integrated system. Starts with the money that flows into the politicians' hands. They hand them handwritten bills that completely set up the trade policy, the labor policy, the banking policy, the taxation policy, and it's all set up to benefit them.
And from their point of view, why wouldn't they do that? I mean, if it's that easy to do, it just requires that little bit of effort to buy out this city council or that politician, which go extremely cheap, apparently.
Very cheap.
And we won't talk about the implication of prostitution there, but I think we ought to think of that.
It's blatant.
But, yeah, so you can certainly see, again, give the devil his due, why they do it. And I can see how movements such as you've heard it, like certain communities have started like getting money to buy back our senator. Because that could be very effective. If it comes down to that much money, well, we can put forward, but we shouldn't have to do that. But it's a cynical way of saying what's at stake. And that's important to not miss. That is what we're up against. I mean, it's just this little bit of money that's put out there that's by such a huge amount of influence, and that's what so our votes, in terms of that, what does it mean? We're just codifying what they're doing. I'm not saying nobody should vote, but we have to see that what all this means in context of, what we're signing off on when we vote.
Yeah. And what does your vote mean compared to somebody that can hand $1 million in one check?
Yes.
My voice is not quite as loud as that voice.
And I think that's what's different today. If you ask why are people so upset, I think it's because, we grew up with these corporations have always been with us, but they had sort of reins on them, at least to some extent. It's just that now those are largely gone. And what's in our face is how little control that there is, politically or business laws or anything. And when I guess that's what brought me to the Occupy movement, is when I saw that face to face, how huge this beast is that has to be confronted. But what that can also do, Paul, is bring a bit of despair, because when you do look at it all whole in one piece, here are our little we trying with our chipping away at our hammers. Please speak to that. Give us hope.
Well, I've actually been told many times by several different people when we start having these conversations that, they usually end in the same way. Man, you're really depressing me.
Okay.
And I mean, but collectively, there's been many things that have, it was once considered acceptable, that women couldn't vote. It was considered acceptable, labor practices that are long gone were considered acceptable. But the simple fact is, when we stood up together and said, this is not acceptable, things changed. And right now I don't look at the current corporate stranglehold that these people have over our entire government. I don't look at it as any more of a insurmountable task than the civil rights movement or any of the other things that we've gone through. This country changes, and we're starting. We're a young movement. We're starting, but the conversation is on the table. It has begun, and I strongly believe that we have just as much chance as any other movement has had in this country. No one started off, I mean, public approval speaking, I mean, if you look at it, there was, the anti-war movement, the women's rights movements, all these movements, no one came out of the gates with over 50% approval. And no matter what the media war is on the Occupy movement, we still have broad public support and approval, no matter how they try to paint us. So right out of the gate, I think we've got a fighting chance, more so than other movements in the past have.
We did seem to hit, Occupy, the larger movement, did seem to hit a nerve. It sounded like people were ready for this sort of message, even though they weren't sure what it was, and even maybe we within Occupy can't agree. But there are general overtones to what it is. And as we move forward, those get better and better defined. But yet the resonance that I heard from people that don't talk politics were suddenly asking me, what's this all about? And I explained the best way I knew how. But yeah, we as you said, Paul, we sort of are starting to the positive, and I think that hope is justified, that you say, because take the civil rights movement, for example. I mean, I've seen polls conducted in the late 50s, even early 60s, and being pro-civil rights was a distinctly minority view. We don't think of that now, but because it was obvious, those people were in the right, those for civil rights protesters that were getting fire hosed or attacked by dogs. Well, of course, that was correct. But yeah, we say that now with the hindsight of where we've been through, but that was not as obvious at all at the time, and didn't become a majority view that's pro-civil rights within the general populace until after those events started happening. That's what changed minds.
Yep.
So I'm not saying we should run out and get fire hose or anything necessarily, but there are events that sort of, if you put yourself out there and non-violently, that things happen as a result of that, and maybe we can get there more easily than we did with civil rights. But I do see that. I see what you're saying out there. There is definitely. I mean, take for example. I'll give you another example that you mentioned, the labor history, which we don't know in this country. I mean, We need to know it, and it's just not known. What we came from, and the heritage that you know, our grandparents and great-grandparents fought for so we could have a middle class. One of my grandfathers and great-grandfathers were all Pennsylvania Railroad, and I worked for the railroad. But my one great-grandfather had a finger missing from this hand, and I think 2 from this hand, because he was a trainman. And he would be in the yard, you know, switching cars out. Well, this is 1890s. This is before the days of the, you know, the coupler that was the knuckle coupler. It would go like that. And this used to be just a pin that you'd put in to couple the cars together. Well, it was a hazard of the job. You put this pin in, and if the locomotive engineer just suddenly decides to back up suddenly or go forward, you've lost a finger if you're not quick enough. And it was viewed at the time like, well, that's just the hazard of the job. You knew that when you took it. You know, what's your problem? Yeah. And we just accepted that. But out of that came the Railway Safety Act of 1890-something, and the modern couplers that we have today, the knuckle couplers, which saved a lot of knuckles, ironically. But, or not so ironically, but the point is that it's through the people that pushed for the unions, and railroads were one of the first, as I understand it, and are successful in that regard, but that's where we came from. You know, so what was just, you know, losing a limb, losing your life, well, you know, was acceptable, suddenly wasn't acceptable when, you know, the early radical, and it didn't seem radical at the time, I'm sure, these people were just standing up for their rights. Mm-hmm. You know, oh, I will not lose my life, I will not lose my limb. You will do something about these couplers. And Congress responded favorably, and so there are things, you know, that can unfold that way. But what I sense now, and I'm talking about the larger labor movement as it is now, which is sort of, I mean, I'll express my opinions that they're just mine, but how it is bought off by electoral politics. Oh, you're with the Democrats, and okay, give us your money and now shut up. And that actually works. But not at the grassroots, because I talk to a lot of people, trades that I work with, the railroads that are representing all kinds of trades, and they are not on board with this at all, but the union management is. And as you go up higher, more and more so. So how do we, or how would Occupy sort of influence that to reinvigorate labor, re-radicalize it, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, that's actually one of the things that brought us, they gained a level of respect from us. The ILWU has a very, very rich history of being a very active militant union. And people died for that union. I've heard, one of the most impressive things that I heard in all the discussions that I had leading up to the D12 action and planning for the eventual blocking of the ship that was coming to the terminal. Dan Kaufman, the president of the ILWU 21 there in Longview, he told us about being in the 1970s being on boats that literally put themselves in between the big cargo ships and the docks to block them from docking. He point blank said, "I will die for this union." And to me, there's a level of respect that was gained for that. I mean, no matter what came out of the upper brass and no matter what gag was put on that man later, to sit at the table and hear him say, "I will die for this union," and to hear him describe how he put his life on the line for the union before. And, just the other community actions that they've been engaged in. I mean, they stood up. They were very opposed to anti-apartheid stuff. They held protests and went on strike. They had a history of respecting community protests and picket lines before. They stood up against the Iraq War. I really think that, especially with the union members that seem to be against Occupy, I think that they really need to look at their own history and see just how close we really are at the core. I mean, that's just a connection that we all share, and all unions have gone through their own personal struggles, and just the fact that they're willing to stand up and realize the greater good of a collective body of people standing up for the same thing. And when that one group's voice is just magnified, it's you know, it's the people's mic. You know, you hear it because
so it's a sleeping giant.
Yes,
there's potential there.
Huge potential. I don't think anyone has realized it yet, but it's a strong connection that's already there. We just have to realize it.
Isn't that what all the money is being spent by companies like EGT to kind of head that off? I think they sense that. Oh, yeah. They're very worried about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was immediately, within 2 weeks of us formulating, working in conjunction with Occupy Portland media team and others that were involved in, you know, the communication that was going out, we developed, you know, it's a political term, but it's a list of talking points, and it is a direct strategy where we went after EGT. We exposed them. We exposed, you know, the human rights violations, the environmental violations, the market manipulations, and all of the things that they are engaged in worldwide as association with Bungie International. You know, when we went after that, it was within 2 weeks. Every radio station you flipped through at any given time of day, you'd hear this, "We're EGT," public service announcement. You know, and you know, that made me feel great because I know they're spending money. They're spending money, yeah, which shows that they're scared, they're worried, they're being exposed. Yes. And the only thing they can do to counteract the truth is put out this ridiculous public service announcement, kind of, you know, PR campaign, buying full page ads in local newspapers and stuff like that. I mean, you know, that was absolutely apparent that they were scared.
And that can be very useful because we want to serve notice to them. But my fear is that maybe they don't have anything to worry about too much because labor is so divided against itself, or has been. Mm-hmm. You know, how, you know, that's something Occupy can't affect. I mean, that's something labor has to get their house in order. You know, maybe we can help, but let's recognize at least that labor has to stop fighting amongst themselves. It's so easily separated. You know, it only takes, we talk about a little bit of money. There again, it doesn't take a lot for the corporations to kind of make that happen.
Yeah.
So
it's messaging. When you control the message, you control it all. And you know, the way that companies, the corporations, the media, everyone involved, they're all in it together. They all have a common stake in it, and it's all goes back to the money. And they spend a little bit of money to control the message, and they control everything. You know, the view that the general public is going to get is what they see on TV, and they control the message by buying the media, by buying the airtime. I honestly like to, you know, you can gauge the quality of a television news program by their sponsors and advertisers in between. You know, okay. You and I cannot buy a single thing. We can't walk into a store and say, "Give me something that BASF makes." But you sure see that these chemical manufacturers buy public airtime in between CNN news spots and MSNBC, and by doing that, they're controlling the discussion that this network will engage in. You know, they control the message, and you know, by buying a 45-second airtime slot, there's not going to be any discussion of what BASF is doing to the environment, or you know, companies like EGT. There's not going to be a counter discussion about it ever, because they are a paying, supporting advertiser. Mm-hmm. That station that's broadcasting the message is bought and paid for before the thing's ever turned on.
But you raise a good point when you mentioned that the way to get through all that, yes, labor is easily divided against itself. You know, Occupy groups may not agree between themselves. But if everybody just focuses on that one key thing, which is what you said, the corporations, the company, what are they doing, and see how that is against all of our interests, and that just seems to unify everything. Mm-hmm. You know, so keep the focus on that, and things, everything flows from that.
Yeah,
let me just, Paul, how are we doing on battery? Are we okay? Because we're at the hour now.
Yeah, I got about, well, probably about, I mean, the battery's doing fine, but I have 27 minutes of footage on this one left.
Okay. We can edit this out, but I mean, how do you feel, Paul? Do you want to take it to the half hour? I mean, just...
I'm fine.
Okay. Because actually, I'm starting to run out of questions, but this is good. Let's see. Let me take a moment and focus where we are and what else. Okay, I didn't bring this up yet. I want to get your input on, hey, look, it's not just the ILWU, it's others too. You know, let's find these other ones out there. Hold on, let me just go through. Gather our thoughts here real quick. It's good though. How's it coming across?
Pretty good, I think. So far,
Man,
yeah.
you're a good speaker, man.
I've been told that. I just have my mom and other people.
Okay, I think Paul, yeah, I just have some things we hadn't touched on. We kind of fleshed that out. Did you want to say anything more about, oh yeah, why don't we get where you are currently? We didn't really go to the current timeline. So, okay, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and that's, when you were talking about the connection, how labor is divided, that's kind of the focus of where we're going with the Labor Council.
Okay.
That's our next move is actually the Labor and Occupy Solidarity meeting that we're going to have.
Okay.
And that is the focus.
Great, that would be the next, okay, excellent. Do you want to make a call?
No, it's just going crazy. I'm getting message after message after message here. I don't know why.
Okay, so Paul, we'll take it to the half hour and just give us a high sign. If you see the battery starting to wear out, then I'll wrap it up.
I only have about like 25 minutes left on here.
Okay.
Of tape.
Tape.
Of
tape. Yeah. There's never need to switch it out. We'll end in the half hour or so. All right. Okay, so we'll pick it up.
Maybe about like 20, 25 minutes on mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just give me a high sign because I kind of lose track. Okay. All right. So, do you need to push a button or still
ready?
Okay. So, Paul, so you updated us to a certain point along the timeline of where Occupy Longview and the ILWU, your combined efforts. So where are we? Take us to where we are today with all that.
Well, basically, the evolution of the messaging and the direction we're going with this. We've honestly realized some of the mistakes along the way. It caused our direct involvement and the way we approached it and the message that we put out initially caused ripples within Occupy. It caused ripples within the actual ILWU itself. Of course, we had the support of rank and file in our town because we're standing up for them. But other locals, is like you said, there's a division among labor itself. Even different locals within the same union can't seem to get along. And through the process there, we've gotten to the point now where it seems a much more fitting for us to stand with labor as a whole, to try to develop the connection directly with organized labor. So we're actually approaching the Labor Council. They initially gave us the opening with the resolution that they passed on January 1st, calling all working class people to the city of Longview in support of the ILWU, and to follow that same stand that we took with that resolution. We're following up now, May 11th. We have a scheduled, it's still in the early planning stages because it was just announced and voted on by the Labor Council, but we're going to have a community gathering, and it's going to be the Labor Council of Cowlitz and Wahkiakum County, and we're going to stand together and have a community night. We're going to enjoy pizza and lots of discussion, maybe possibly live bands and stuff like that, but it's going to be a night to basically draw a distinct connection between organized people and organized labor, and hopefully gain momentum and see what we can work on together from there.
So the May 11th event, that's not necessarily to declare victory or celebrate any victories, but to further what you're doing.
To build the relationship,
To
yes.
keep building it, yes.
To carry on the momentum, however, whatever group wants to rate that momentum and call this a victory or this a milestone or whatever you want to address it as. I just see it as a little bit of a momentum, a spark that could, reignite a fire.
Okay, so that brings us up today. Are you folks involved in the May 1st? Some occupiers are doing it.
There's a lot of things being coordinated. There's talk of a general strike, May Day actions. It's been many years since national labor movements have participated in any May Day actions. I mean, May Day is an international thing.
Yes, sir.
And it's been a long time since the United States, I mean, actual labor unions have participated in
Celebrated through Europe.
Yeah.
Most of the world, in
yes,
fact, but not
in the United
here.
States.
Yes.
But Occupy is actually planning many things around that. There's several, I'm not involved with those planning groups, and I don't have all the facts, but I do know that there's several event pages and things like that that are being shared through social media networks and whatnot. And Occupy Portland itself is they're developing a labor teach-in workshop. Initially, it was going to be part of a regional Occupy conference that grew. It started as a Oregon Occupy conference, but Longview wanted to be involved and other people around the area, so it turned into a regional conference. And from discussion of that regional conference, one of the breakout groups that formed came from this ILWU and Occupy involvement together. It's more of a labor teach-in, a workshop of, to discuss how to move forward, the mistakes that were made and what we can gain and the benefits that come. I mean, it's all a growing, learning experience, and Portland's working very hard. There's a group of core people that it's constantly evolving, and I don't have all the details on that at this point either, but they have a great organization down there, and they're working on different workshops just like this social forum here.
So you've had some successes and drawbacks, but you're not standing still. You're building on this all the time. That's, and I think the rest of us the rest of Occupy needs to learn from because you folks have been sort of on the forefront of all this. But talk about, if you would, the May 1st. Well, it's a little controversial because at first the call was put out for a general strike. Yeah. And then when labor says, oh, we're not really on board with that, oh, well, okay, let's downgrade it. But, I mean, maybe there is a role for that, but I wonder, because at some point, maybe. But there again, we talk about building. You have to build toward that. Yeah. That just cannot happen. And you can't just declare it without labor. Hey, we're doing this. Labor, are you on board or not? Or you're not? Okay. Yeah. We can't just, proceed without some building of it. So, so maybe, this happens eventually, but it would take several bites at the apple, I would think, to get there. And maybe this is one of the bites. Yeah. As long as, people don't claim that it is more than it is.
Yeah. Eventually, I would, some people that I deal with are looking at what are we doing this weekend? What are we doing, this month? Mm-hmm. I'm more along the lines of, how do we get to where we're going to be 5 years from now during the next major general election? Do we have the potential to really put forward, no one wants to be political, but to me this is all political. The political system is what brought us all here. And eventually I would like to see real candidates that, not just Occupy, but organized labor. Is it possible to build a serious candidate for any office that completely endorses and gets up there and stands for the principles that we're putting forward? Can labor and Occupy really influence a political cycle? That, to me, that's where we're going 5 years from now, 4 years from now. It's not just about the next action coming up, but and like you said, the May Day thing, labor. We mentioned it to the Labor Council when we first brought up this idea of having a joint rally together. When we said May Day, the look on their faces was,
incredulous. Yeah, I've seen that too. That look. Yeah, I mean, there's a case, you talk about mistakes made, maybe that's a mistake that Occupy often makes, to be self-critical, which is how you grow the movement, which is to get out in front too far ahead. I mean, I work with a lot of these guys that are, and they're of a broad spectrum, anyone could be, but you could bring them along, but you have to really work at that. Mm-hmm. You have to put in the time. It's not just something that falls into your lap, but
I think that's probably one of the things that a lot of people just don't understand, the level of time and commitment that goes into everything, leading up to any action. There's a certain core group of people that are constantly trying to bend and twist and get everybody on board, and include everybody and find a way to get more involvement from this person and that group and this faction, and I mean, that's the appeal, and it's also just the curse of Occupy, is trying to get so many people with such a vast opinion all on the same page for anything.
Yes. Yeah, we've seen that play out, and it doesn't always end prettily. But labor as a political force, you mentioned, and that I think we'd all like to see, as opposed to what it is now, which is just, yes, you buy in with the Democratic Party. Your labor, we assume you're Democratic Party, and everything follows from that, and that's where it ends. But I'm thinking of, for example, in Germany. I mean, labor has a presence, and it's a small party, but it has a place at the table. Despite its 5% or 10%, whatever it is, electorally or representatively, labor has a strong presence at the corporation table, with the government corporation. And I mean, if we could have just a slice of that here, I mean, that would be so different from what we have now.
Yeah. And that honestly, that is my ultimate goal, and what pushes me, and why I say it's absolutely necessary to be engaged in the political process. I'm not talking about endorsing parties or candidates, but by gathering enough support and giving yourself a voice at the table. I mean, I think it's absolutely imperative that you approach your city council. You start with your local government. You try. We're about to introduce a resolution, basically stating that people are people, corporations are not, and money is not speech. And if we can build on that and get our city council's support, get a resolution passed, and then we go to county, and from there to state. And I think building an organization where we have a focal point. The ultimate goal to me of Occupy is to restore representative democracy, because people in general are not represented anymore. It's all about who's got more money to play the game. And until we restore that, our standard of living is not going to change. Environmental protections are not going to change. We're not going to move forward into the future. Our infrastructure is going to crumble. We're going to be behind the rest of the world in education and everything else. I mean, and until we engage the political process, we will not affect any kind of real change.
So we'll put on our to-do list then, get corporate money out of politics, and then the other thing is get labor to have its own political party and away from the Democratic Party. So what do we do after lunch?
Labor Occupy.
Yeah. Okay, done. But those as broad goals are certainly something that, yes, with our little hammers, need to be chipping away at.
Yeah. And, I mean, to me, that's that would be the strength of a real organization between labor and Occupy. It's, like you said earlier, it's waking the sleeping giant. It's getting people re-engaged in the process. I think if in general, if it was possible to buy enough TV airtime to explain to people, this is why you're pissed off, and show them the trail, the money trail, the actual process of the laws that were written and passed that opened the floodgates to where we are now. If people actually understood that, it'd be over with tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or there would be a mass revolution in this country.
Yes. That's the thing I mentioned earlier, that you can certainly make a case that what we're arguing for is a brand of conservatism. It's not necessarily that we're asking for new rights. We're trying to preserve, just hang on to what we got and build on that.
Yeah.
So, but that's enough to frighten the corporatists, because you're asking for participation in your democracy, and that's on the way out.
Yeah.
So we're trying to reverse that trend.
Yeah. It's almost an unbelievable statistic that less than 38% of qualified voters actually participate in our electoral process. That 38% can't be heard over the 100% of the corporations that are putting the money in there and writing the laws.
Okay, so Paul, tell me how do I talk to these guys? Like I say, I work with a lot of union guys on the railroad. Some would buy into what we're saying, a lot would not. But I go to their union hall meeting, and I'm management, so I don't even know if they'd let me in. But let's say I don't approach them as management, I approach them as this Occupy guy. And hey, you know, we're doing just what we're talking about here. We'd like to see if there's common ground, what can we do? How do I talk to these guys to bring them in? Are there certain things that, you know, you tap, like for example, wage disparity? I think that gets them going. You know, they do get that you know, there's a flow of money, like we were talking about earlier, and it's not directed at them. In fact, it's away from them. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that would be an in, I suppose. Is there any things that you would, you know, recommend?
The success and I guess the message behind it. When we approached the Labor Council, you know, it was just a few of us that I stood up there and I said our little piece. We were welcomed as a guest, and we came in there to basically ask them if they would support a joint rally celebration. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and of course initially, you know, with the media and all they're showing is the tires being slashed and bricks thrown through windows by Occupy people. Of course a real legitimate county labor organization, you know, their initial concern is, whoa, you know, but I mean the strength that Labor Council represents those people that are sitting there in that audience, and those people in that audience are going to have a vote, not just that president and treasurer and the people that are sitting there at that table that invited you to come up there and speak, and to speak to those people on a connection level. You know, they know that their union membership numbers are down, they're circling the drain, and they can see. You don't have to have a chart or a graph. They live this stuff. They know their benefits are changing. They know that, you know, even as a strong union member, they're experiencing the rest of what working class America is experiencing. Everyone else's wages are going up while ours are stagnant or declining, and our benefits are too. To make that connection, I just, one quick phrase is, you know, here's organized labor, here's organized people. We can work together. And to connect with them on that level and say that, you know, I'm here as a person. I'm here as a person, and I'm telling you I'm willing to help you. You know, that's where we really connect right there. It's just on a personal level. And you really have to understand where you're speaking to, because, you know, we can go to an Occupy meeting and we can get militant, we can pound on a table and we can say that we're going to do this and that, and we support a diversity of tactics and all that kind of stuff. But when you're talking to some higher ranking official that's going to have an effect on the outcome of a vote, or whether or not that vote's going to take place, there's a time and a place for each discussion. You have to understand the audience you're speaking to and the venue you're at that point.
If you want to be effective. Yeah, because I know for a fact that these guys I work with, you know, if you're about F the police and breaking, you know, windows or whatever, that has a certain cachet, maybe with some people, but not with them. Yeah. I mean, if you want to be effective, that is not the way. It's the things you were saying.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a little off topic, but I'd just like to let it be known. I've said it before. Those people that are out there slashing tires and breaking windows and all of that kind of stuff, they say that it's a tactic. They say that they're standing up for what they believe in. I don't see anyone standing up and believing in anything when that cop's there. They're not. When that cop responds to that vandalism, that person that did it because they were speaking up for what they believed in, that person is nowhere to be found. If they were really standing up, they'd be standing there waiting to get arrested for a purpose, period.
If there's a larger point being made, then hang around to make it.
Yeah.
Don't run.
Stand there and tell the judge when you plead that that's why you did it.
I think that's very telling, yeah, actually. Now we're getting the diversity of tactics folks against us. But
I'm sorry. I support them, but
yeah.
I would support them more if they really followed through with what they say.
Right. Or prove how that is effective. You know, I mean, if you could make your case, we'll all listen. But how does that grow the movement? And that's what we have to do. I mean, our numbers are small. But, you know, 6 months in, okay, not too surprising. We have a committed core group within Occupy. And we're very ambitious. I mean, here we are talking about reaching out to labor. You know, when maybe we're getting premature with that. But I mean, we have to think about how to do that, because eventually we need to. So that's what this is all about. But so our reach exceeds our grasp, or whatever the expression is. But that is plotting out where we have to go. And Well, I think we are probably fast approaching the end, Paul, but let me focus on a few things that we didn't cover. So I'll just kind of ask rapid succession here. Okay, how do we pick the battles that I mean, labor, whatever group you contact, they will have certain issues that they're dealing with, but maybe not all of those are something that Occupy should necessarily latch onto. Maybe they're not, we want to be successful. We want to back something that can have an effect, an impact. So how would we sort of sort through? The one you were involved in was a prime example of what we should be doing. That's a good example where Occupy can certainly jump in and do things for labor. Labor can't do it for itself. Mm-hmm. Given the, it's union membership will get fined, but if they do it, but obviously we are free to do it.
Yes.
So that's my question: is how do we sort of narrow down from the potential actions that we could be doing to something that is more likely to be successful?
I don't think there's a battle that we can pick that we can't find a way to win it if we approach it with a strategy. I mean, there's, just for instance, most recently, they're trying to build one of the largest coal terminals in the United States for coal export, and it's going to be right there in Longview. Now, if we stand up and we start banging on the table and we say we're against the coal terminal, well, you know what? That's stepping on the toes of labor and the jobs that they're going to have in that community. So approaching it strategically and tactfully to address the issue and maybe affect the outcome, instead of saying we're anti-coal and pounding on the table, we're more looking at, one, of course, expose the company. This is the company and this is what they represent. Expose the money that they're spending, the political influence peddling, all of that kind of stuff. That is a way we can approach that without getting in the way of labor. We can approach it environmentally by, asking them what is your plan to follow through with strict environmental protections and regulation and whatnot. We can also approach it, we're looking at is this coal thing moving forward. We want to develop a contingency plan. This company has got their talking points down. They're on point, they're on message, they're saying everything's going to be okay. So we develop a strategy where we ask them, if you're so confident in everything, put your money where your mouth is. When we see the health risks and all of the implications that could happen, when we see this 10 years from now, we want a trust fund set up. We can approach every fight with a strategy. And we may not, I don't think specifically that you can completely block a coal terminal or a grain export terminal from being built. That's big commerce. That's a lot of jobs. That's, we don't want to necessarily completely block it, but we can have an influence in the process and how it's done. And by picking the right way to approach each battle, every one of them can be won, so to speak. It's just a matter of the strategy. And some things happen so quickly, the strategy develops as it happens, which is what we went through with the entire port and ILWU struggle thing. Everything it was an adjusted message and an adjusted strategy as we moved forward. It was constantly evolving and just
most elaborate battle plans don't survive the first contact. Yeah.
Just recognizing that game of chess is evolving as we're going. I mean, I think that's part of fighting the fight, is you have to be willing to bend, you have to be willing to adjust and immediately recognize where things are going wrong and how to change it quickly. But that takes people being involved and consistently, instead of throwing their hands in the air and walking away. It takes a certain group of people to keep things rolling.
Well, as we wrap up here, I'll just mention that I've been cycling back and forth between despair and hope, and let me end on hope, because you give me that. And your experience and you and your people and what you've been able to do. And I think we need to replicate that. Choosing our battles wisely, but choosing them and engaging and bringing, and success, nothing brings people in more like success. So we build on that. One thing, the Occupy movement in general gives me hope, because this was 2 years ago that my son, who's the videographer here, and I went up to, 2009. we went up to New York where there was a big labor action, and it was supposed to be like a march on Wall Street. In fact, they advertised it that way. So okay, so my son Paul brought his camera along for an event. What was going to happen? We were going to get on film, and I just wanted to be there. Well, there was the rousing speeches. Trump came out, and they gave great speeches, and they turned out the people. They could turn out people in New York City in the area. So, and we all said, okay. So after all the speeches were done, now we're going to march on Wall Street. Well, we proceeded to do that, and we did. And we walked right by, and we yelled. And we had our, those that had brought signs, and Wall Street people went, huh, well, that's interesting. Oh, gotta go home now. Yeah. We went down to the end of the park. It wasn't Zuccotti, I forget what, but beyond that. And we all felt pretty good about it, and we all went home. And that was, so in 2009, so obviously before Occupy. And my son asked me a question, is that it, Dad? I guess that's it. and I thought, well, now here's all this potential, but it isn't realized. And, marshal the troops and got everybody out there, like I said, got us worked up, but nowhere to go. Yeah. At the end of it, what I think the brilliance of the Occupy movement is, to occupy a space, and it's moving beyond that. So not necessarily just, that was how the movement recognized ourselves and introduced ourselves to each other and to the larger world. As we move beyond that, it isn't maybe necessarily to occupy space, but that was the starting point. It's saying that, we claim this and we're going to be heard, and we're going to catapult ourselves over the traditional media, and we will be heard. And that's just success. It's only been 6 months. Yeah. And yet, so as I say, that's what gives a lot of hope. Here's something else. You mentioned the ILWU, which has a pretty, I don't know, radical, that's too strong a word, but very engaged, very activist, right? There are others out there. Within my own industry, the railroad industry, this is from the web page, I have to read it here, the Brotherhood of Maintenance Away Employees, the BMWE. And I'll just, if you can't read it, this is on the webpage. It says, no war but class war. Over here it says, make jobs not war, regime change now. This is, and it goes on like that. And as I say, this sort of thing, if you don't look for it, you don't notice it. But there are these pockets of very activist people who are ready for something like what we're talking about, if they're engaged. They may feel somewhat isolated within their own group. Maybe they're the radicals and they're not listened to. But this is for the entire state of Pennsylvania, the BMWE representation. So this is not just one lone person. This is a large organization. So they are out there. I see evidence, and once you start looking for them, the more you find. And this is how to do so. But we have to proceed carefully, Paul. You're 100% right. We have to be mindful of where the union guys and gals are coming from, because it isn't the same place maybe as your cross-section view of Occupy. But we need to start talking to each other. There's this huge common ground and differences can be overcome. We know that, but it has to be worked at. And you give a great example of how that can be done. So we'll be interested to follow how that unfolds in your case. But
well, I just do.
So do you have any thing to go ahead and wrap up?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we realized through all this is the strength of the Occupy movement. Without the collective involvement of Occupies up and down the West Coast, it was coordinated through whatever means of communication and transportation, whatever we went through to get to that point. But the fact is, Occupy Oakland, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Tacoma, Vancouver, everybody that was in communication, and it was really obvious to the public, and it was broadcast on the web and everything. It was blatantly obvious that we were coming together and we were going to stop what you were planning to do. That, at the moment when we were faced with the Coast Guard being called out by the Department of Homeland Security and the President to escort an empty transnational corporation's cargo ship to a public port inside the interior borders of the United States. At that point, we were still not afraid. We know that the Coast Guard's coming. We know that a militarized police force is going to be there, and people were still not afraid. And they were still willing to come to the city of Longview, put their bodies on the line, and stand up for what they believed in. The strength of the Occupy movement is its solidarity. From group to group, we can all communicate, we can all work together. A 2-year labor dispute ended without a single body converging to the city of Longview because of the threat of Occupy coming. We were exposing a company, we were exposing the political process, we were exposing the money trail, and they're broadcasting it to the world that, hey, our military is your private mercenary force, and we're willing to give you that. Just set up your shop here, you know. And in the face of all of that, Occupy was still strong enough to make that company that recorded $2.6 billion in profits in 2010, they still blinked. They still sat down at the table. After 2 years of labor dispute, they sat down, they came up with an agreement. No matter what the details of the agreement are, the politics of unions and the agreements that they come to and all that, that is union business. Occupy had no voice at that table, and we have no fault or credit in what agreements they come to. Our credit is the fact that we came together and we brought this mega corporation to the table, and they buckled. And I think we can do that in every city, every town, any day we choose to do it.
Interesting. So if you want to be effective, and you could be nonviolent, but one of the most radical things you can do, Paul, as I'm convinced, is to stand your ground, to not be moved. That is radical. That takes real courage.
Yes.
And that's the future of this movement, I think. Paul, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.